Good day to you. This is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. The episode that we're going to be screening today is a remembrance episode where we discuss and remember and honour the fallen that we knew personally in the war. And our guest today is Mike Norton. He's going to be speaking about 14 such men. And it's a tragedy that they've gone, but this is a way that we can honour them. And it's also a way that we can bring enlightenment and encouragement to their relatives and maybe closure for some of them. So Mark, welcome aboard. It's good to see you again.
Thanks, Tony.
For those of you who don't know Mark, he's spoken on the channel before in episodes 30, 40, 47 and 210. Very interesting episodes, so please do go back and have a look at them. But obviously the focus now is to bring these men back into remembrance. So I'm not really going to treat this as an interview, Mark. I'll just let you talk. And so over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, as you say, it's good to be able to speak about the guys who've gone before, because they were all comrades of ours, and they need to remember you. And it's a very good point you make about the families as well. Right, I was course 23 at WEB, 1971 to 73. Our course was 44, and of that course, 5 guys were killed in action during the war. The biggest of any of the courses. Obviously, some of the other courses did also lose people, but we seem to take this course took a particular hammering. I think if you remember that, not only were the guys either doing national service or had finished national service and were farming, many were farming, so it was a double danger on the whole thing, and they were mostly on call-ups in their areas. So it was those times. They were difficult times. First guy I'd like to remember was Field Reservist Paul Crouch. Paul was, as I say, the same course as I am, and we played rugby together and all the rest of it. And we actually, were pretty like the whole of the WEB courses. We were all very, very close, because it's 2.5 years you're together and doing everything, playing sport, misbehaving, all the rest of it. So Paul was sadly killed on a Part 2 call-up in Kotwa, when they sustained a vehicle ambush just after they'd had a contact, and he was killed there. Paul was killed on the 17th of December 1976, so fairly early on in the struggle. The next WEB 23 student to go was Peter Boet Kluti, who was also killed in a contact in the Kotwa area. That was on the 8th of August 1976. Boet was farming in that area, and on a Part 2 call-up met his death. The third member of the course to be killed was Bean Smallman. He was a forester up in the Melsetto area, and he'd been on convoy duty on that Melsetto Chipingi convoy that they ran all the time. He lived in the forest areas on the Charleswood estates, and he had just taken his father-in-law to change over with him to do the convoy duties. And on his way back, with a couple of other guys in the vehicle with him, they were ambushed on the estate, and Bean was killed on that particular thing. Sadly, his wife was 7 months pregnant at that particular time, and his son was called Robert, which was Bean's proper name. The fourth guy was Dave Topham. He was a Rhodesian Armoured Car Regiment, and in the Chipingi Melsetto area again, was on patrol, clearance patrol in a ferret. He was out of the commander's seat through the turret, and they hit what must have been a boosted landmine, because he was killed immediately in that whole thing. He was a sergeant in the Rhodesian Armoured Car Regiment. Then the last one was a very good friend of mine, Bob Gash. He also joined the BSAP at the same time as I did, and stayed on as a regular, and became a special branch operator up in the Mount Darwin area. He was a detective section officer when he was up in that area. And one day, going to follow up some information in the Chesa purchase area, which was a hotbed in those days, as you remember, he was ambushed in his Land Rover and killed. And Bob was another, as I say, another special branch comrade of mine who got killed during that struggle. Those were the 5 WEB guys that I wish to remember today. If we can now move on to other areas of the places I was posted. The first one being Kotwa, when we were the early ground coverage guys, known as Team Alpha, operating in that Kotwa area, and we operated there for about 14 months. In setting the groundwork on that area. There'd been an insurgency group come through about a year before, and so insurgency certainly was imminent. There were 4 of us operating in 4 different areas of the Kotwa area, all the way as far as Nyamapanda and back towards Motoko. And Patrol Officer Bruce Baker had been my colleague there for about 7 or 8 months, and he operated in the Ngarwe area, which is up towards north of the Kotwa Nyamapanda Road. And he was a good operator, and he was following up on some information from a source that had turned out to be quite reliable up till then. And for some reason, as we only found out afterwards, he normally never went in and out the same route. But in this particular case, it was late in the evening, and the source said to him, "Don't go out the other way. Go the way you came in. That nobody would be expecting you." Well, unfortunately, they were, and Bruce and his detective constable, David Tawengwa, were killed in the ambush on that vehicle on that particular day. That was a very sad time for it, and again, a tight-knit group of people that we had up there in those particular days. Then we've got Mukumbura. I'd recently transferred over to Special Branch in those days, and it was always a rite of passage to do a stint in Mukumbura. And it wasn't a particularly busy time. Frelimo's was still reasonably friendly on the other side. We had an unwritten agreement that we wouldn't do anything unnecessary to each other. That we were after the insurgents, not them. But we had an engineer squadron there, and at that time they were laying the mines, and the minefield had gone through, and the engineers were laying all the plowshares on the fences. And one particular day, Corporal George Swan, to this moment, I don't know what reason, decided to set up a 60mm mortar on top of what's next to the Mukumbura Surf Club, top of a little bunker that's there, about sort of 2.5 meters above the ground. I came around from where I was, not very far away, and talking to him up there, shouting, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm just putting up a 60mm, just in case somebody crosses the river at the drift, and we're going to range it onto that. And that'll be part of our defences." And I said, "Okay, whatever, wonderful." And I wandered off back the other way. And 3 or 4 seconds later, I heard an enormous bang. Turned quickly to see that the mortar George had fired the mortar, and for some reason it had detonated prematurely just out of the tube, and killed him and wounded Jim Datson. Luckily, Jim had a wooden leg already, and most of the shrapnel took Jim in the wooden leg, but it killed George outright. That was a hell of a waste. That whole batch of bombs were withdrawn, and I didn't hear anything later, but I suspect that there was a batch error on the whole thing. He was a magnificent guy, brilliant engineer, and a hell of a waste on that one.
Pretty sad.
Yeah. Then we move on to Enterprise, of course, where I spent 78 and 79, right into 80, with the operations just out of Salisbury as it was then on the Shamba Road, which is I've recorded on my previous talks. It was a particularly hot area and became hotter and hotter. The first soldier to die, or policeman to die in that area, was Detective Sergeant Prosper Tani, BSAP Special Branch, but attached to the project section, which was a pseudo group. It was not part of the Sleuth Scouts, but it was a pseudo unit that we used in and around close to Harare to do exactly what the Scouts did, try and get into the local intelligence network and contact men and all the rest of it. And they were working Chabwino Farm, which was 300, 400 meters away from the base, the club. I was actually off duty at that particular time. And unfortunately, what happened is the Enterprise Part 2 guys were very aggressive, and they hated having to sit around and do things. And although I'd frozen the area, they took it upon themselves to think that the farms weren't frozen. Unfortunately, they wandered down to Chabwino Farm and ran into the pseudo group. And obviously, a firefight ensued, a very brief one, but unfortunately, Sergeant Tani was killed in that. The Part 2 guys were inconsolable. They were so upset about the whole thing. Anyway, but those things happened, I'm afraid. The Op Enterprise came in April 79, which was as I said, documented that whole thing. It went extremely well for 17 days in April. And then as things happen, everything happened on one day. Early in the morning of the 18th, Gunner Jean Donnet, he was a gunner in the Rhodesian artillery, but they were operating in a ground role for Enterprise at that particular point, particularly with OPs and ambushes. They were on the edge of the Chinnamora Tribal Trust land, edge of the farming area, Enterprise farming area, early one morning. Embedded with them were, per each stick, there was two former Rovanus who came from Max's guys in the Masana, who knew the area pretty well, and in fact they were reasonably good operators. But what sadly happened, unfortunately, was when they broke the ambush in the morning to move away back down onto the road, the SFA, obviously only in his green and brown uniform carrying an AK, wandered ahead, and for some reason which I never found the explanation for, a Partu stick had been stationed about 100 meters away from them. Whether that was a briefing error or absolutely no idea. They opened up on the SFA, of course, thinking he was an insurgent, and at the same time opened up on the movement they heard in the bush. And Gunner Jean Donnet was killed in the skirmish. So although we did have quite a few, look, I mean, if you read the obituaries and the rolls of honor, they were that type of war. Blue on blue was not not. It happened sadly. Then same day, in almost the same area, again on the Chinnamora boundary of the Enterprise farming area, fairly late in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock, 3:30, a Scouts OP had picked up a group on a side of a hill, and sent in three sticks, on the fire force from one commander RLI. They'd had a successful contact. I think they'd probably killed about 5, and they were re-sweeping again late in the afternoon, where the shadows were now falling. And unfortunately, the K-card had to go back to refuel because the K-card was on red light. So there was no top cover at that particular point. And it was from Enterprise, it was probably about 3 kilometers. So it was just there. The helicopter barely landed when Corporal Nicky van Niekerk, BCR, called that he'd been hit, and that he was down. At the same time, Trooper Roland Geldernes from the same stick and Trooper Young were both also wounded by an RPD gunner that stood his ground from about 10 meters. The rest of the stick eliminated the RPD gunner, but there was now a big problem. So Doc Webster, the RLI doctor, was flown in. It only took like 2 minutes to get there, and he did his best to. Roland Geldernes was unfortunately dead immediately. He tried to resuscitate Nicky van Niekerk, but it wasn't possible. His injuries were too great. But Trooper Young, he managed to save and flew to Andrew Fleming Hospital. But sadly, at the end of that operation, that was almost the last day. I think we had 2 more days to go. Those casualties happened in that particular area. So once again, circumstances, and this is what's unfortunately this is what you expect in a war.
Yeah.
Then just as an aside, which I don't know if it helps or anything, but Roland Geldernes' father, Dirk, was a farmer in Darwindale, and he had chosen to do his call-ups with the Enterprise guys because he had a lot of friends within the guys in that area, and he'd been on call-up with us quite a few times. Then obviously Roland, his son, was killed. He came back on call-ups after that, and on the 14th of August, not very far from where Roland had been killed, his stick had a contact with 5 or 6 insurgents, killed 2, and we captured quite a few documents. In there, it related to the contact that his son had been killed in. So I suppose that was, I don't know if he felt comfort from it, but he certainly, was pretty broken for quite some time after that.
Quite amazing that.
Yeah. Then we carry on to Operation Mulligan, when the farmer's wife was abducted, and there was a frantic push to try and recapture her before they managed to get out the country. But we didn't succeed in that. But we did succeed in having some very big contacts with big groups in the Chikwaka TTL. This is the particular one where we split the fire force up because we had information of groups being in two areas about 3 kilometers apart. I coincidentally was flying in K2 that day. And we split from the main, this other part of the fire force. They went off to the most likely sighting, or most likely information. We went to the secondary, and it turned out it was the other way around. Our secondary was the hot one, and we immediately went into a big contact with about 35 in that particular area. The two guys involved there were a Canadian trooper, W.E. Elasia, he's known as Ike, and Bruce McKent, Trooper Bruce McKent. They were in stop 6, and we deployed them from it was Orange 6, yes. Dropped them on the ground at the top end of the crawl. The crawl was a large amount of brick houses. It's a fairly prosperous area, that so there were more brick houses than thatch. And they advanced towards the houses. As we were in our second orbit, firing we had the alpha fit on the second takeoff, firing as much as we could to suppress movement and fire in the area. But unfortunately, they approached a window on a brick house, and I presume it sounded like an RPD gunner, mowed them down, killing them instantly on that thing. That contact continued into the evening, into the night, and eventually, once we'd managed to get everybody back, it had to be golf bombed to try and sort out the final remnants. That's the same incident where I was shot down in that KCOP. Well, we were shot down in that KCOP by a very good RPD gunner on the ground, who the troopies told us afterwards had us pinned, leading the aircraft, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He eventually hit us in the engine and brought the aircraft down. It was a Cat 4 write-off, but luckily we only sustained minor injuries. But once again,
you came down on auto rotation, did you? Because I guess the engine had backed in.
We didn't really have too much. We were low because we were trying to get under the eaves of the houses, and the alpha fit, being a 4-barrel Browning, we found worked better that way. It was no good firing into the soil, a very sandy soil. So we were firing into the houses, and also we were probably at about 200, 250 feet as opposed to 800. So the pilot, Ian Henderson, he just pulled everything he could do and got me to pull on the collective as well. And we flared a bit, but we hit the ground very hard. Luckily, it was a plowed field, and we didn't sustain. I got a smack in the head and various other bits and pieces, but we were quite lucky on that particular one. But sadly, those two guys didn't make the grade. The last guy I need to talk about was a very good friend of mine, farmer in the area, enterprise area, field reservist Ephraim Volker. We had those motorcycle sticks, which we ran in that area, and he was a stalwart of that and a very brave soldier. These guys came out, pulled out at any time. We had basically them. They were virtually not farming. They were fighting the war. And that was on the 3rd of August 1979. They were riding back from a successful sweep and a contact and a crawl in the Chipaka TTL. They'd captured a Majiba who clearly knew quite a lot was going on, and they'd put him on the back of Effie's motorcycle, and they were riding back on a path that they'd traversed before, and he hit a front wheel detonation on a landmine. Awful. Now we can only surmise what happened was somebody had laid a box mine with a ratchet. So although the path had been used before, it just happened to be this time that the ratchet went off. That was, again, awful. And Tony, that's really the lot that I've got to go through. I remember these guys. I remember them all very, very well. I mean, I can still see them in my mind's eye very, very clearly. And I'm pleased to put this on record and hope that it does help. Just a point I've just suddenly remembered. Many years ago, I was contacted by a Canadian lady who was an aunt of the Canadian Ike Elasia, and she asked me if she was told that I'd been on that scene, and I said yes, I was on that scene. I was overhead. He said, "Please tell me that whether Ike was killed by his own men or was it an insurgent?" I said, "Look, it was right under my eyes, and I can tell you with 100% certainty, he was killed in action." Killed in a contact by the enemy. And she said, "That is so relieving. because over many years she'd believed that he'd actually been killed by his own troops. Now, whoever started that story, I have no idea, but I was glad to be able to put it right. Which goes to your point about helping the family.
Yes, very much so. I think this is going to be wonderful for some of the relatives listening. And Mike, thank you for bringing those men's memories back to life. We do owe them all a debt. They went in willingly to fight the enemy for the love of their country, and unfortunately lost their lives. And it's very sad. It's very tragic. All that lost talent, all that lost love, the potential to have children in the future, whatever, all taken away from them. Very sad. And the relatives today, I guess, are still struggling with it on birthdays and that type of thing. But this is the way we can honor them. And I want to encourage anybody who's listening today to please come and do the same as Mike's done, and others have done this already. It's very important that we remember them. Mike, on a slightly different subject, you brought up the mention of a ratcheted mine. Was there clear evidence of ratchet mines being used? Because I was in the third truck in a column and it got blown up, and 2 other vehicles had gone over in front of me, and I was in the third one and I got hit. So is there evidence of that you know of?
Well, Tony, the hole where the mine went off, obviously there was nothing we could locate in there. It was just from the engineer guys that I got to know, and I made a few inquiries. I said, we can't understand this, because in theory, the weight of a motorcycle, even with a second passenger on the front wheel, should not set off the TM46.
Yeah,
that's when he told me that there's now a ratchet. And if you do remember, our guy, the insurgents we battled against, the Salisbury detachment, were the spearhead of the push to Salisbury, and they had some of the best guys, their best guys in there, taking into account the fuel dumps. They were the same guys who did the fuel dumps, so they knew what they were doing beyond the ordinary sort of ragtag guy. So I can only believe that the engineers knew of this, and it's probably it might have. When did your one happen?
77, somewhere around there. Yeah, April, May 77.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. The engineers did tell me there was such a thing as a ratchet mine.
Yeah, it's I don't doubt that they used it, but I've searched records and read things, and I've never really found anything that sort of was concrete evidence. But the circumstantial evidence is there. I mean, how could I be the third in the same tracks as the vehicles in front of me? And I get it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.